I'm 97 years old, and I will not waste your time with poetry or soft words. Love is not what you think it is. That is the truth I discovered, and it took me almost a century to understand it clearly enough to say it without hesitation. If you are waiting for me to tell you that love is about passion or finding the one or holding on to someone forever, then I must disappoint you early, because that belief is exactly what kept me confused, hopeful, and quietly unhappy for most of my life. When I was young, I believed love was something you felt, a sudden warmth, a pull toward another person, a kind of electricity that made everything else fade into the background. And when I met my husband at 19, I thought I had found it. He made me laugh. He held my hand like I mattered, and for a while, that feeling convinced me that I was safe, that I had found something permanent in a world that constantly changes. But feelings are unstable things. They rise, they fall, and they shift in ways you cannot control. What I didn't understand then, what no one tells you when you are young, is that love, if it is built only on feeling, will slowly turn into expectation. And expectation, when it is not met, becomes disappointment. That is where most love stories begin to quietly break, not in one dramatic moment, but in a slow erosion of what people thought love was supposed to be. I spent years trying to hold on to a version of love that only existed at the beginning. I thought if I tried harder, gave more, sacrificed more, I could bring it back. I confused endurance with love. I confused silence with peace. I believed that staying, no matter how I felt inside, was proof that I loved deeply. But what I was really doing was abandoning myself in the name of something I didn't fully understand. And here is the part that may surprise you. Love is not proven by how long you stay, how much you endure, or how deeply you feel. Those things can exist without love. I have seen people stay together for 50 years and never truly see each other. I have seen people sacrifice everything and still feel completely alone. Time does not guarantee love. Sacrifice does not guarantee love. Even loyalty on its own does not guarantee love. At 97, after watching people come and go, after losing friends, after burying my husband, and after sitting alone with my own memories for more hours than I can count, I realized something that changed everything I thought I knew. Love is not about holding on. It is not about possession, permanence, or even closeness. Love is about how much truth can exist between two people without fear. And most people never experience that. I did not arrive at that understanding quickly. In fact, I resisted it for most of my life because it required me to admit something I did not want to see. That much of what I called love was built on fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of not being chosen. Fear of losing what I had already invested years into. And fear, when disguised as love, is very convincing. It makes you stay when you should question. It makes you tolerate what you should confront. It makes you quiet when something inside you is asking to be heard. In my marriage, I became very good at being agreeable. I learned what to say, what not to say, and how to maintain a sense of stability even when something felt off. From the outside, we looked like a successful couple. We raised children, we shared responsibilities, we celebrated anniversaries. People admired our longevity, but inside that relationship, there were entire conversations that never happened. There were truths I never spoke because I believed love meant keeping things peaceful, not honest. And this is where most people misunderstand love in a very dangerous way. They believe that love should feel safe at all times. But real love is not built on comfort. It is built on honesty. And honesty is not always comfortable. In fact, it often disrupts the very peace people are trying to protect. So instead of choosing truth, they choose silence. And that silence slowly creates distance, even between people who share the same bed for decades. I remember one night, many years into my marriage, sitting at the kitchen table long after everyone had gone to sleep. I was staring at nothing in particular, just feeling something I could not name at the time. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was something quieter, something heavier. Now I know what it was. It was disconnection, not from him, but from myself. Because every time I chose peace over truth, I moved further away from who I really was. And the more I did that, the harder it became for anyone, even the man I lived with, to truly know me. How can someone love you if they are only seeing the version of you that you think they can handle? That is not love. That is performance. This is the first truth that shocked me when I finally understood it. Most relationships are not built on love. They are built on mutual performance. Two people agreeing, often unconsciously, to be who they think the other person needs them to be. And as long as that agreement remains unchallenged, the relationship continues. But the moment truth enters, real, unfiltered truth, the structure begins to shake. That is why so many people avoid it, because truth is unpredictable. It can bring people closer, but it can also reveal that there was never real closeness to begin with, and most people would rather live with the illusion of love than risk discovering its absence. I lived that illusion for many years, not because my husband was a bad man. He wasn't. He did what he knew how to do, but neither of us understood that love required something more than shared time and responsibility. It required presence. It required the courage to be seen fully, without editing, without softening, without hiding the parts that might be inconvenient or uncomfortable. And I did not have that courage then. It took loss for me to begin seeing clearly. When my husband passed away, I expected grief, and I did grieve, but what I did not expect was the flood of questions that followed. Not about what we had, but about what we never allowed ourselves to have. All the conversations we postponed, all the truths we avoided, all the moments where we chose ease instead of depth. That is when I began to understand that love is not measured by how long a relationship lasts, but by how real it is while it exists. You can spend a lifetime with someone, and never truly meet them. Or you can know someone for a short time and experience a level of honesty that changes you forever. Time is not the measure. Truth is. And truth requires something most people are not taught: emotional responsibility, not just for what you say, but for what you feel and why you feel it. Most people expect their partner to manage their emotions, to make them feel secure, valued, and complete. But that expectation creates pressure, and pressure creates distortion. Because now, instead of being honest, people begin to adjust themselves to maintain the other person's emotional stability. That is not love. That is dependency. Love, as I have come to understand it, does not ask you to abandon yourself to keep someone else comfortable. It asks you to remain fully yourself while allowing the other person to do the same. And that requires a level of maturity that most people never reach, not because they cannot, but because they are never told that this is what love actually demands. We are taught that love is about compromise. And yes, compromise has its place. But there is a difference between compromise and self-erasure. And many people cross that line without realizing it, believing they are doing the right thing. I did. For years. If I could go back, I would not change who I loved. I would change how I loved. I would speak more. I would risk more. I would allow discomfort to exist if it meant being honest, because now I understand that discomfort is not the enemy of love. Avoidance is. And that is the second truth that shocked me. Love does not fail because people stop caring. It fails because people stop being real. When honesty disappears, connection fades. And when connection fades, people begin to feel alone, even when they are not physically alone. That kind of loneliness is the hardest to recognize because it hides behind routine, behind shared history, behind the appearance of stability. But it is there, quiet, persistent, waiting to be acknowledged. I ignored it for too long. But time has a way of revealing what you tried not to see, and at 97, there is no reason to pretend anymore. After my husband passed, something inside me changed in a way I did not expect. It was not immediate. At first, there was only silence. The kind of silence that fills a house so completely that even small sounds feel too loud. I would sit in the same chair every morning, drink the same tea, look out the same window, and feel as though time had slowed down just enough for me to notice everything I had ignored before. Not just memories of him, but memories of myself within that life. Who I had been, what I had felt, what I had chosen not to say. And when there is no one left to maintain an image for, something very uncomfortable begins to happen. You start to see yourself clearly. There is no performance anymore. No need to protect anyone from your thoughts. No reason to soften the truth. And that clarity at first is not peaceful. It is confronting. Because you begin to realize how much of your life was shaped by unconscious patterns, by fears you never questioned, by beliefs about love that you simply accepted without examining whether they were true. I began to revisit moments I had long buried. Not dramatic moments, not arguments or crises, but small, quiet moments where I chose silence over honesty. Moments where I felt something deeply but dismissed it because it did not seem important enough to disrupt the peace. I used to think those moments did not matter. Now I understand that they mattered more than anything else, because love is not built in grand gestures, it is built or slowly undone in those small decisions. There was a particular memory that stayed with me. It was nothing extraordinary. One evening, my husband asked me if I was happy. It was such a simple question, and I remember pausing just for a second before answering. That pause, that was the truth trying to surface. But I ignored it. I smiled and said, "Of course I am." And he nodded, relieved, and we moved on. That moment passed like any other. But now, looking back, I see it differently. That was an opening, a chance for something real, and I closed it. Not because I wanted to lie, but because I was afraid of what honesty might change. That is when the third truth became clear to me, and it is perhaps the most difficult one to accept. Love is not destroyed by conflict. It is destroyed by avoidance. Most people believe that arguments, disagreements, and tension are signs that something is wrong. But in reality, those moments are often invitations. Invitations to understand each other more deeply. Invitations to bring hidden thoughts into the light. Invitations to replace assumption with clarity. But when those invitations are ignored, when people choose to keep things easy instead of real, something important is lost. Not immediately, not dramatically, but gradually. Avoidance creates distance, and distance creates misunderstanding. And over time, that misunderstanding becomes a quiet barrier between two people who once felt close. They begin to live side by side, sharing space, but not truly sharing themselves. And because there is no obvious conflict, they assume everything is fine. But beneath that surface, something essential is missing. That missing piece is not passion. It is not excitement. It is truth. At 97, I can tell you this with absolute certainty. The deepest form of loneliness is not being alone. It is being with someone who does not truly know you. And that kind of loneliness does not happen overnight. It is built slowly through years of withheld honesty, through countless small moments where truth was available but not chosen. After I understood this, I began to look at love differently. Not just my past love, but love in general. I started observing people more carefully. Younger couples, older couples, even friendships. And I noticed a pattern that I had never fully seen before. The relationships that appeared the most stable were not always the most honest, and the relationships that were honest were not always comfortable, but they had something deeper, something more alive. I met a woman in her 60s not long ago. She told me she had been married 3 times, and people often judged her for it. They assumed she had failed at love. But when I spoke with her, I saw something different. She spoke openly about why each relationship ended. She did not blame the other person entirely, nor did she hide her own role. She had learned with each experience to be more honest about who she was and what she needed, and eventually she chose to leave situations where that honesty could not exist. Some would say she gave up too easily, but I do not see it that way anymore. I see someone who refused to live in a performance, someone who valued truth over appearance. And in that sense, I believe she understood love more deeply than many who stay in the same relationship for a lifetime without ever truly being seen. This is where the idea of love becomes uncomfortable for many people, because it challenges something they hold on to very tightly: the belief that staying is always the right thing to do. But staying on its own is not a measure of love. It can be a sign of commitment, yes, but it can also be a sign of fear. Fear of starting over, fear of judgment, fear of losing identity. And when fear is the reason people stay, the relationship may continue, but love, in its truest form, quietly fades. I am not saying that people should leave at the first sign of difficulty. That is not what I have learned. What I have learned is this: the question is not whether you stay or leave. The question is whether you are real, because you can stay and be real, and that creates a deep, evolving connection, or you can stay and perform, and that creates distance, no matter how many years pass. And here is the part that truly shocked me when I finally understood it. Love is not something you give to another person. It is something you allow to exist between you and another person, and that space, where love lives, is built entirely on truth, not partial truth, not edited truth, but complete, sometimes uncomfortable, always honest truth. Without that, what people call love is often just attachment, habit, or mutual dependency. It feels stable, it looks convincing, but it lacks depth. And depth is what gives love its meaning. Without depth, relationships become routines, predictable, manageable, but not alive. In my later years, I began practicing something I had avoided for most of my life. I began telling the truth, even when it felt unnecessary. Not in a harsh way, not to hurt anyone, but simply to be real. And what I noticed was remarkable. Some people moved closer to me. They felt safe to be honest in return. Conversations became deeper, more meaningful. There was a sense of connection that did not require effort. It simply existed. But others stepped away. Not because I had done anything wrong, but because honesty made them uncomfortable. It disrupted the patterns they were used to. It removed the predictability of interaction. And in that moment, I understood something else. Not everyone is ready for real love, because real love requires you to let go of control. It requires you to accept that you cannot manage how someone else will respond to your truth. And that is frightening for many people, but it is also freeing, because when you stop trying to control how you are perceived, when you stop adjusting yourself to maintain a certain image, something opens. You begin to experience connection without effort, without strategy. And that kind of connection, whether it lasts a moment or a lifetime, is more real than anything built on performance. If I could speak to my younger self, I would not tell her to love differently in the way most people expect. I would not tell her to be more patient, more giving, or more understanding. I would tell her something much simpler and much harder. Tell the truth sooner. Do not wait for the right time. Do not protect the peace at the cost of your own voice, because every time you silence yourself, you move further away from the very thing you are trying to preserve. And love cannot survive that distance forever. So now, at 97 years old, after everything I have lived, everything I have misunderstood, and everything I have finally come to see clearly, I can say this without hesitation. The most shocking truth about love is not that it fades or fails or disappears. The truth is that most people never actually experience it in its real form. They experience attachment. They experience comfort. They experience routine, dependency, even loyalty. But love, real love, is something far more rare and far more demanding than most are prepared for. Because love is not about staying no matter what. It is not about sacrificing yourself until there is nothing left. It is not about maintaining peace at all costs. Love is about truth, and truth, if it is real, will always ask something of you. It will ask you to be seen without hiding. It will ask you to speak without softening what matters. It will ask you to risk changing the very structure of your relationship in order to make it real. And that is why so many people avoid it, not because they do not want love, but because they are afraid of what love requires. They are afraid that if they are fully honest, they will lose the person they are trying to keep. But what they do not realize is this: if honesty destroys the relationship, then it was never truly held together by love to begin with. It was held together by agreement, by habit, by unspoken rules that kept everything appearing stable. I lived most of my life inside that kind of stability, and from the outside it looked like success, but from the inside it was incomplete. Not empty, but not fully alive either. And I did not have the awareness, or perhaps the courage, to change that while I still had time. That is something I have had to accept, not with regret that consumes me, but with clarity that grounds me. Because here is the final truth I want you to understand, if you are willing to hear it. It is never too late to experience real love, but it may require you to let go of everything you thought love was supposed to be. You may have to release the idea that love should always feel comfortable. You may have to stop measuring love by time, by sacrifice, or by how much you have endured. And instead, begin to measure it by something much simpler and much more honest. Can you be fully yourself without fear in the presence of another person? And can they do the same with you? If the answer is yes, then you are closer to love than most people ever get. If the answer is no, then it does not matter how long you stay, how much you give, or how deeply you feel. Something essential is missing. At 97, I no longer need love to look a certain way. I no longer need it to last forever. I no longer confuse silence with peace or endurance with devotion. I understand now that love is not something you hold on to. It is something you allow to exist freely, honestly, without fear. And if I could leave you with one thing, it would be this: do not wait as long as I did to understand that.